Northern Israel, especially closer to the coast, receives the most rainfall, whereas southern Israel, especially inland, is much more desert-like. Here's some scenery as we're driving north through Beishan, and here's some scenery as we're driving from the Jordan River to Jerusalem. This is just a brief introduction to how life can be so different in one part of Israel to another, and how that this place would be no good for cultivating land. By contrast, this also shows why this land would be good for grazing sheep and goats, because you wouldn't want to graze sheep and goats on cultivated farmland. That would be like stealing the produce of the farmer's hard work, whereas, believe it or not, there are weeds and stuff in this desolate wasteland.
75% of the country is dry. Only 25% in the north gets rain. 75% of the rain falls in 25% of the year. So what does Israel do? It stores, listen to my long sentence, it stores the 75% of the rain falling in the northern 25% of the country in the 25% of the year in the winter, in places like the Sea of Galilee, which have a dam that you saw, to be pumped later to the 75% of the land to the south, in the 75% of the year without good rain. But what problems, you see?
This land is actually irrigated with water channeled all the way from Galilee, but this land isn't, and this is the most southernest point that we came to, which is shown here on the map.
So north and west is wet. Why are they wet? Because they're far away from a southern and an eastern desert. Today we've come southeast. So southeast is dry. Have you noticed? What's the southern desert called when you go far enough south? Sahara. There's sub-names of that Sahara, which I've given you. Wilderness of Paran, Wilderness of Zin, Negev. What's the eastern desert called? The Arabian Desert. There's sub-deserts there, Arava, Wilderness of Judea, towards the east.
This sub-wilderness called Zin that we're in is where the Israelites wandered for 40 years, and this is an oasis that the Israelites most certainly would have come to while they were wandering. Next we'll go to a place called Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is where the Essenes' headquarters were. I'll talk about that later.
The humidity generally, even in winter, is not more than 15%. The darkness and the low humidity were the two main things that kept the organic material from biodegrading away. One scroll was on copper, several were on wood, slats. Most were on the sheepskin, the parchment, a few were on papyrus.
And the papyrus, could they put that back together and read it?
Yeah, the papyrus fragments, of course those were fragmentary. They were not preserved as well as the sheepskin ones. Right. But you see, papyrus grows in oases like this. There's one building down in that oasis that has the same strata as this, 150 BC to 70 AD, and it was a plastered pool that had tannous chemical in the plaster. So it was where they tanned the hides of the sheep to make the scrolls down there.
You know, when you fly in your airplane, they keep them saying, come on guys, drink a lot because it's so dry in the airplane, it's about 12 to 14% humidity. Qumran, on a regular basic day, 6%.
There was an interesting master's thesis of a student who came here with a metal detector and combed. It took him 6 months. Made a grid, walked every 3 feet going like this, all the way between Qumran and the cliffs. And anytime there was a beep, he picked it up like it was nails from sandals. And he was able to put on the grid, and we now know the path from the cliffs, the tents, to Qumran. It was a 200-year period, 150 BC to 70 AD, that this group lived in the caves and the tents and walked here for their daily life.
Next we'll see the Dead Sea from a couple of high altitude spots in view driving by it along here.
Weather today generally is only about 2 inches less of rain than in biblical times a year. That's not a lot. The difference, the dry season is 6 months of no rain, and in biblical times it was 4.5 months. So certain species that can last 4.5 months of no rain have died out because they can't last 6 months of no rain. You can tell this by pollens in the ruins. Pollens don't biodegrade. You can tell what kind of trees grew here, what species of grasses. When there's mud plaster, the grass leaves an impression in the mud, right? So the excavation helps us know the species of plants nearby. And that's how we can predict the rainfall, because we know what those plants need today. They would have needed the same moisture back then.
Next, we'll jump ahead in our tour to when we go to Beersheba, which is an Old Testament ruin.
Here's some mud bricks from time of the destruction, which means 586 BC. And if you look carefully, you see impressions of grass and holes, though the grass is biodegraded. But you can tell there used to be straw here. The impressions of it and little holes. So this mud brick was so old, the organic material. See the leaves of grass and the holes where there used to be straw. This is just like dirt now. In fact, my hand is falling apart. And a good botanist can observe the genus and species of the grass, right? From the negative impressions.
Our next view is back by the bottom of the Dead Sea again, where Sodom and Gomorrah are traditionally believed to have been before they got covered by water. When I was reading the Biblical Archaeology Review's archives and I didn't know what they meant by, quote, soundings, I had to look it up on the internet. Now they can learn some things about ancient sites without destroying them. For instance, one fairly simple thing they do is take aerial views of the ground, which helps people see the outlines of fortresses when even an archaeologist's trained eye can't recognize it on the ground level. And archaeologists also now access tools like gas chromatography and nuclear magnetic resonance, with which they can chemically analyze the isotope ratio in tooth enamel versus the bones and so on. Don't you just love living in a fascinating age such as this?